In the annals of time, riding social forces as they crest and crash onto the shores of history, some would-be heroes stumble but manage to recover their breath. Others are reduced to the flotsam and jetsam of nostalgia. These others are our subjects. They are the vanquished.
Welcome to the Vanquished. Anders J. Lay here.
FreddyG here.
I don't know why I said Anders J. Lay here is what I just said. Like I'm Tom Lay or something. I don't know.
Like you're a Tekken character?
Yeah.
What does the J stand for?
It stands for James McGrain, who was my grandfather and was actually a New York City police officer. And we were complaining about
fascist.
I mean, as they often say, he was Irish, and in those days they had you teethe with a billy club if you were an Irish baby in New York. Like he had no choice. Is how it was told to me.
Was he involved in the New York City draft riots of the time?
What year was that?
I don't know. It was around the time of Gangs of New York.
Yeah, he's not that old. He was. I mean, he's dead now, but he was, for better or worse, born in 1918. So pretty old, but not that old. But we have our guest, Jaffer Khan, on today.
Thank you for having me, guys.
I'm so happy to have you.
Love y'all.
Yeah, and I wanted to have Jaffer on for a lot of reasons, similar politically, and also this guy who we're going to talk about today has been accused of being a Russian asset, and Jaffer and I were Russian assets.
Yes. We were accused of being Russian assets.
Sure, yeah. We were on a cable network that was technically Russian state media, but who's counting?
I feel so snub. Yeah, Russia's not reaching out at all.
I mean, yeah, I always give that answers like if they let me be their face of media, they're probably not doing that great. They're probably not that conniving ultimately.
Yeah, Russia, if you're listening, I'm unemployed.
Yeah.
So are we.
Yeah. No more rubles.
Why don't we start? So Henry Wallace is the name of the guy we're tackling today. I think I first heard about him because of the Oliver Stone movie, which inspired a lot of consternation. This came out like 2012, 2013. I had probably heard Ralph Nader mention him at some point because Nader was kind of compared as like the modern version of him. So I heard a little bit about that, but I didn't quite understand how close he was to actually being president and guiding the fate of the world, basically. As we'll get to, he was a few feet, and I mean literal feet, from being president. That easily could have happened, and the world would be, pretty much everybody agrees that the world would be different. How different is a matter of debate, but he's certainly a fascinating character. Fred, I know you said you hadn't heard of him, right?
Oh yeah, you mentioned it. You mentioned Wallace to me, and I'm like, oh, it's you. Eugene Wallace, last guy to get electoral votes as a third party.
George Wallace.
There's so many. Well, again, okay. There's basically, if your name is Wallace, you've been vanquished. Yeah, I had no idea who he was. Still, I guess it's still a little confused. But yeah, I then became obsessed with him. Amazing story, and also huge impact on agriculture. Like on this podcast, he's a loser. We're about politics. But if this was an agriculture podcast, he would be such a winner.
Yeah, he's the reason why like 2% of America is working on farms, which sounds like it's a bad thing, but he improved efficiency and productivity and made it so less people had to do that. Unfortunately, there may have not been a plan in place for the people who are no longer doing that, but he certainly would want to win. He was a hardcore progressive from Iowa, born in 1888, and he is the fourth Henry Wallace in a row. So they're just like cranking out Henry Wallaces. He comes from a family of Henry Wallaces, and I guess was probably the last one in his family, but I
don't know if he had a kid named Henry.
No, I don't think so. But he did have a middle name which distinguished him from the other Henry Wallaces, Agard, which I don't know what the...
Okay, so I tried to look up Agard, like what does it mean? I thought it was like some cool like Viking thing, and I couldn't find anything. But Agard does become a wing of NATO responsible for like missiles or some kind of thing. So Agard ends up becoming his worst nightmare, Henry Wallace, because Henry Wallace was not a NATO guy.
Yeah.
Agard Vanguard is a great name for an armed NATO wing.
Oh, the irony. But he grew up on the farm. One of the biographies said he really didn't spend any time doing extracurricular activities because he had to get home and tend to crops. And I remember learning about daylight savings time on the other side of my family. My grandmother grew up on a farm, and like the reason for that is so people like her could get home before it was dark because you had to walk long distances. And that was true in Iowa. We should just get this out of the way. One of the more recent biography of him, Henry Wallace in the World That Wasn't, by Ben Steele, it's a very critical, very critical biography of him. And right off the jump, he heavily speculates that Henry Wallace today would be diagnosed with Asperger's.
Brutal criticism. Absolutely eviscerating this guy. What a joke.
The kind of the knock on him is that he's a dupe and wasn't socially aware enough to know that he had been infiltrated by Stalin. We'll get to how true that was, but they point to him being kind of socially aloof, so that's evidence that he's autistic in the view.
Yeah. Look, I pretty much know nothing about any of this, but it seems absurd to say this guy who's clearly so accomplished, was significantly running for president, to say that he was actually an idiot.
Yeah.
He actually had no idea what was going on.
Yeah. He knew something, and he was a very smart guy, especially with agriculture. A genius, some would say. He was not in with the Washington set. Even when he was living in Washington in the Roosevelt administration, he didn't like to party and stuff like that. And at the time, that's like, well, he doesn't hobnob. There must be something off.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like, he seemed like he very well might have been on the spectrum, but he was very smart. He wasn't so smart with people. The no extracurriculars, it's like, well, did Beethoven have extracurriculars? No, he went home and composed music.
Yeah.
This guy
Exactly.
is the Beethoven of corn.
When did this ableist book come out? That says,
Like a few months ago.
That's insane.
Yeah.
There's a nice quote from his childhood. There was a time when he knew corn as well as he knew people, and I had for it as much affection. He says there was a time, but I feel like that was his whole life, because he does not stop with the corn even
He loves
late
corn.
in life.
Yeah, he's a cornhead. He went to college, I think it was college, with George Washington Carver, and they were buds. And that's kind of, I think, a big part of the reason why he hated racism. He hated Jim Crow because one of the best agricultural minds was a black guy, and he was like, why would you deprive him of a seat at the farm table?
So it's even a little better. So his dad's a teacher at the college, and George Washington Carver's going to college. And Washington Carver's mentoring him as a boy. Yeah.
So and they continue to be friends and correspond.
But by the time he's 15, he's already inventing new species of corn, and he's proving that the best looking corn isn't the corn that actually produces the best. And this ruins the entire Iowa Corn Festival circuit. Because that was all about people going to a fair and seeing the most beautiful corn. And then it's like, well, that corn sucks. I proved it's better. It's like this nerd just ruined these festivals, and they go away after 10 years later.
Yeah, just because it's yellow and juicy looking doesn't mean that it's actually efficient to produce or grow or use. He used economics. He used math. He used calculus to understand the farm system, particularly hog prices, which that was a big problem at the turn of the century going into the 1920s is what do we do about hog prices? And that kind of goes into his beef with Hoover, or I should say his pork with Hoover. But he takes over the family magazine, Wallace's Farmer, which is what it called, that was a huge deal in agricultural rural America, is this magazine, Wallace's Farmer. He was an influencer within the farm
It was
world.
the farmer's almanac of the day.
Yeah.
Put it that way.
Throughout the 1920s, he is like a kind of a power player in American politics because of this position. His father, of course, is in the Coolidge administration, and they are Republicans, but they're progressive Republicans, and they sort of break with the Republican establishment here and there, especially in 1924 when he backs Fightin' Bob, La Follette, who runs for president, Republican senator from Wisconsin, who breaks and becomes a quote unquote progressive.
Give a little more. Yeah.
Sure.
So Harding appoints him. He's the Secretary of Ag. This is the dad, Henry C. Wallace, and Hoover's the Secretary of Commerce. And then Harding dies, Coolidge is in, and then basically he's fighting. Wallace is fighting Hoover for like influence, and Hoover beats him at this fight, and then he dies of I forget what he dies of, some kind of like organ issue right after. But his son Henry A. Wallace says this that Hoover killed my dad.
Yeah,
and ultimately he'll be working for the administration that defeated Hoover.
Right. Yeah, he hates Hoover because of that. And
wow, so it's a vengeance story.
Yeah, truly.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and he does kind of get his comeuppance against Hoover in the early 30s, but before that, like, he religiously is very hard to pin down. He's raised Calvinists, which I think explains a lot. They produce a lot of weird people.
That's the predestination.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm a Christianity nerd. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that would make me weird.
I know the least about Christianity. I'm the only one here who was raised Christian, technically, or baptized.
Absolutely, yeah. I've just read a million. Yeah. Before I was obsessed with losing presidential candidates, I was obsessed with Christianity.
Loser religions.
Yeah.
Oh, damn.
Got him.
Roasted. I'm agnostic. But he's really into, throughout his life, theosophy, which is not very common anymore. But and I think also dabbles in Zoroastrianism.
Oh, damn.
So
yeah.
he's into a wacky...
I know about that. I don't know the other thing you said.
It's like Aleister Crowley, I think, is in the mix with theosophy.
The name sounds like Scientology.
Yeah.
It does, actually. Yeah.
I try to understand what it is. It's like mystic and Eastern. It's just basically confusing. It's something that only Henry Wallace could understand.
Yeah. But he...
Only an autistic Russian asset could understand something like this.
So he does like basically treason for this religion. He goes to like Manchuria, and they're trying to like establish some kind of like theosophy state that's going to like redeem Russia. This is in like the 30s when he's Secretary of Agriculture. And initially, like Roosevelt's like letting him do it.
Really? I was about to say this is crazy. This is a crazy kind of a double life, kind of crazy side hobby to have.
And like then they just basically, it's going bad, it's not working, and they find a scapegoat and they blame the scapegoat. This guy Rarick, who was like more into it. And then so Wallace gets away with that. He gets away with his first attempted treason.
Yeah, maybe not a conscious attempt, but it's hard to tell with him sometimes. But going into like the late 20s, of course, there's the Great Depression, which, as a lot of historians are quick to point out, for rural America started before 1929, started before the stock market crash, and so people are really hurting. People who subscribe to Wallace's Farmer, and going into the 1932 election, he is making good with FDR, this upstart candidate who, at the time, right, it was the wires were kind of crossed politically with the Democrats and the Republicans. There were conservative and liberal wings in both parties, so you get this kind of...
They're all trying to find their little coalitions.
Right, yeah. And Roosevelt goes on to be a more progressive president than what he runs as in 32, but he brings Wallace into the fold, I think, because of his clout with rural America, because this is his magazine publisher, his dad. He's kind of a legacy agricultural dude, and America at that point is a lot more rural than it is today, so this guy's a big deal, and the Department of Agriculture, also a very big deal. So he is tasked with implementing a lot of the New Deal starting in 1933. He's one of the first people to come into the Roosevelt cabinet.
So yeah, the farm situation's real bad. It's the part of America that's doing bad, and like you said, the corn price has been in the toilet for already a decade. The Dust Bowl's happening. There's even like violence happening by farmers against collectors. Like if America's gonna like go into chaos or like a revolution, it's gonna come from the farms. And FDR's like, well, FDR's not like an intellectual heavyweight. He's like more of a social guy. Him and Wallace kind of have the opposite skill set. So he's like, yeah, this guy will help, and this guy will really help with the farmers. Also, Wallace was the guy who knew the most farmers by name. Like, he was really in the farm community.
Yeah.
Were they like tarring and feathering people?
It seems like that was happening.
Nice.
It was a time you'd want to.
A lost art.
Yeah. Yeah, and the things he's proposing are kind of radical at the time. Price supports, right? Actually using the government to intervene in agricultural markets, which is seen as very radical, but some would argue actually kind of stabilized capitalism, as did debatably the rest of the New Deal. There's some historians who even say that his role in the Roosevelt administration was like the leftmost edge of it, because starting in World War II, people blame Truman for starting to unravel the New Deal. But starting with World War II, there are other people who say that that's really when it started, and a lot of the Wallace-type programs got sort of winded down once the war started. But before that, you had Wallace overseeing a lot of pretty radical planning that brought farmers, that brought labor to the table as kind of this, like, kind of creating boards of a type to decide how the economy was going to run. There's like democratic planning, and that part of this era has kind of been washed over with history, but that was like one of the most radical steps in the history of American politics.
Yeah, I did. I read this in some Chomsky book, but yeah, basically, like, we didn't try pure capitalism again after like the late 20s. And at first we do these New Deal things that really help people, and then it just becomes around like 38, it just becomes military spending. And that's our form of kind of the government intervening to fix the flaws of capitalism. We've kind of been on that since. But like if Wallace had maybe gotten into power after World War II, maybe we would have gone back to the New Deal type stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, but and then we should mention Hoover, of course, is president in 32 and gets defeated by Roosevelt, and when he's offered the job, he is because he's never been elected to anything. He's again a publisher and a farmer, and has made a lot of money in the corn industry, and he's not sure if he wants to go to Washington because of the hobnobbing. It's all about buttering up other elites and stuff like that.
Nice corn pun, bro.
Oh, nice.
I didn't even think unconsciously corn on the brain, but he is really helping agricultural people and develops a following among farmers in America as well as progressives.
I think one reason he decided to do it is he's got the business, the hybrid corn company. He's made his corn that's going to make him rich in the long term. And then the family loses the paper in the Depression. So, like, he doesn't have the paper. It's time to get revenge on Herbert Hoover, and let's do something else.
So, and one of the things Hoover has in his legacy is too much pork, like literally way too many pigs, because he kind of didn't tell the rest of America that like we're raising too many pigs. Like he like should have sounded the warning that like let's cut down on pork production, but he didn't when he was like the head of food, I guess, after World War One.
What do you mean by too much pork?
The price, it was messing up prices.
Okay, I get it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and Wallace. Okay, so like
oversupply.
Yeah, oversupply.
So yeah, like if you kill 1 million baby pigs, that's a lot, right? Yeah. No, Wallace kills 6 million baby pigs as head of agriculture to fix this.
A holocaust of pigs.
Yes,
happened.
exactly. Yeah.
But it was for the good of America because we had too many pigs. We had too much pork. And that is kind of funny how that's part of his legacy. And at the time, it was like, what? Why? What do you? That's crazy, but it worked.
I kind of hate basically to me, this is like a lot of like Adam Smith stuff. Like, if we have too much food, let's give it to people in other countries who need it. Like, I don't really like his method of like decreasing the amount of food. I'm sure there's starving people in other places. And it kind of reminds me of England during the British potato famine. Like, they're like, we're only going to import wheat to Ireland if it's the right price. And that kind of, and like people starting, like, I don't really actually like this ag stuff as much as the books seem to.
Right.
Yes.
Just to disagree with you a little.
I mean, you would have had to ship all the pork over to wherever the people are starving, and like get it. Like the process of getting it to them could have been very difficult.
Maybe with the pork, with the agricultural goods like the vegetables, whatever, that would be a little different. But yeah, you might be right in that they maybe couldn't ship all that pork.
In our market-based economy,
I'm thinking now of like the equivalent to freegans at that time, and they, if they would take some of these pigs home. In dumpster dive, but with like whole live pigs. I guess they could have done that, or like
I don't know what that is.
Like freegans, people who dive out through dumpsters for food. That like.
Oh, okay. I never heard that term before.
Oh, so they eat meat though.
Well, many of them are vegan, but the idea is you're just eating stuff for free.
Freegan.
So,
I get it now.
Freegan, yeah. So maybe some of them, like the 30s equivalent, found some of these dead pigs and were like, all right. I mean, there must have been poor people who. Yeah,
6 million pigs is a lot of damn pigs, like Holocausted pigs, like you said. Pigs are nice. Pigs are.
They're very smart.
Yeah, people love pigs.
They're actually very clean.
I say that as we're like the meat industry right now is like absolute, but never mind. We can go back.
Yeah. But also, this is part and parcel of the New Deal too. There's tenant farmers, there's sharecroppers, who were 43% of the agricultural workforce, and they're kind of left out, and that's remembered as kind of a race thing, and in many ways, of course, it is. But it's also even broader than that. There's just a lot of poor people on these who are tenant farmers who just aren't affected as much by the New Deal.
Yeah, the New Deal was done pretty racistly. The problem with his whole thing is like, I'll pay you not to grow crops on your land. If you own land, you get money. If you work someone else's land, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
And later on, I think he tries to do stuff to kind of fix that. But yeah, early on, he's only helping the small landowners and not the tenant farmers, as you said.
Right, but he does raise farm income by 70%, which is a pretty big deal. But throughout this period, there's a war between the Roosevelt administration and the power elite, as Chomsky would say, which includes the Supreme Court, who's like trying to strike down parts of the New Deal, including the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and they rule that agriculture is a, quote, purely local activity and shouldn't be regulated by the federal government at all.
Just a hobby people like
Yeah. Yeah. And Wallace's rejoinder to that is like, well, if that were true, then half of the United States would just starve. But
Supreme Court was probably like, it won't be our half. It's fine.
Yeah.
Because they were all like rich elite Republicans appointed by the previous president.
Right. They also this has also kind of been forgotten. We mentioned the planning, which was about land use, soil conservation, erosion control. But he also instituted food stamps and school lunches because agriculture covers like basically the entire country. So even if you're living in a city, the food's got to come from somewhere. And he had the power to help people eat who are starving.
I always say that farming's the most important job because if farming stopped, then everyone else would have to quit their job and do farming because you can't do anything else without food.
Right.
It's literally, I mean, sex workers take all the credit. That is the oldest job in the world, These damn prostitutes need to stop stealing the farmer's glory.
Yeah, I mean, they probably were people who did both.
I think during hunter-gatherer days, someone might have gathered and then they gave it to a sex worker. So that's the thing is they may predate hunter-gathering. Yeah.
Damn it, you're right. You know what? I apologize.
I learned a lot about Henry Wallace. Let's put that. Yeah, so basically I like that he kind of invents the idea of paying people not to make food. And that's become an American tradition to this day. And Henry Wallace is the guy who thought of that.
Yeah, I like that. I don't really make food as for a living, really, so you should pay me. But going into 1940, Roosevelt has been reelected in 1936 by a landslide. And he's now starting to feel his oats. I mean, Roosevelt is a very pragmatic figure. He only goes as left as he thinks the country will bear. And by 1940, he thinks it can bear some more. So he ditches his vice president, John Nance Garner, who's a conservative, Democratic conservative. And that's another counterfactual people brought up is I think that's actually what the man in the high castle takes place in a world where Roosevelt is assassinated, which he almost was by an Italian anarchist.
Oh, yeah.
And Garner becomes president and is much more conservative, does not do the New Deal, and then that leads to Nazis winning World War II.
Yeah, there were a lot of American political figures who hated Jews.
Yes.
And I assume Garner also. Garner was probably super racist, Southern Democrat.
He was definitely racist against black people. Anti-Semitism, I'd have to check on. Would not put it past him. But he's dispatched with in 1940. Roosevelt really pushes him out.
That's interesting. Was that like more common back in the day?
To
just fire your VP?
Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, and this was also, after 2 terms, and it was kind of unprecedented. I mean, it was unprecedented to run for a 3rd term, and he went for it because we weren't out of the Great Depression, Now, in retrospect, it's like legally binding that the president has 2 terms, but at the time, it was a tradition, but wasn't quite as seen as like this is a must. And ultimately, I think it's kind of a stupid tradition. I mean, it was
pretty wishy-washy. Washington didn't even want to do a 2nd term, but he sticks around. Then he leaves. Then the Jeffersonian people really stick to it. But then after that, it's pretty like Teddy Roosevelt's running for a 3rd term. I mean, it's like weird technicalities. Grant tried to get a 3rd term at some point. Like, it's really just believed in when you need to believe in it.
Right.
I agree. Like, first of all, fuck George Washington and his dumbass tradition, whatever. Yeah, like, isn't it more democratic that if we want a guy to be president a 3rd time, that people vote for that guy?
Yeah.
Or gal.
The problem with FDR is like the 3rd term I'm like kind of okay with, but then he does this 4th term that like is complete bullshit, and he's basically just appointing a successor. We'll talk about it.
Right.
But it does not work out in a very democratic way at the end of the 3rd term.
Right. But yeah, gearing up for World War II, you can see the Nazis are on the rise, and he's running against Wendell Willkie on the Republican side, who's like an internationalist businessman, and right before the Republican convention, the Nazis take over France, and so on paper, Roosevelt is kind of an isolationist, says we need a neutrality policy, but behind the scenes, he's getting ready to launch World War II. And the Republicans don't really have much of an isolationist opposition, so that's kind of a non-issue. And so that's, I think, part of the reason why Roosevelt feels comfortable pushing out Garner and putting in one of his New Deal guys, Henry Wallace.
Absolutely, yeah. He's basically like, okay, I'm doing a 3rd term. You guys want me? I'm doing it my way, and I want a liberal ticket.
Yeah, and he has to fight the Democratic establishment, who is not happy about that. Again, Roosevelt has moved left over the course of his presidency.
Just like Joe Biden. Yeah. Just like we knew he would. Just like everyone said.
Yeah.
It does say like, he'll appeal to like isolationist farmers who the Democratic ticket's not serving otherwise. Let's see. And there's a lot of opposition. I'm trying to think what's the...
Well, there's apparently a chant that begins in a sewer, as you...
Oh,
noted.
sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, this is when FDR gets reading out. We had skipped that. So basically, FDR picks, like, let's have the convention in Chicago. And he's not there, but he's on a phone in the bathroom to, I think, Harry Hopkins. And he's coordinating everything. And then they FDR's like, he wants to be nominated by almost by acclamation. And then people are kind of into it. Most people kind of want it, but they need a signal. And they have a voice come from the sewer that starts the "We Want FDR" chant, and FDR chants from the basement in the sewer. And then it catches on and he gets nominated.
What? Who was in the sewer?
I think the mayor is coordinating with some guy who's running the convention.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's a guy on speaker.
Oh.
I don't think it's actually a person standing in the sewer.
So they put a speaker in the sewer to get this FDR chant going.
I'm a little confused now if it's a sewer or a
I
basement.
mean, I've heard of gutter politics.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
this
it's definitely, but it's there's dirty
You're on
tricks.
fire.
Yeah.
Dude, the puns.
But yeah, FDR does have like this kind of. He has a lot in common with these dictators. Like everything's about him. Everyone in his cabinet's kind of supposed to fight each other over the same pot, like over power. And it's really he's a very much a one-man government.
Yeah.
And it does have stuff in common to other people like that in this day that I've read about.
Yeah, no, he was an extreme narcissist. He thought he was a demigod.
Yeah, ordained by God's will, his voice emanating from the sewers, as we all know.
Yeah.
And that's also why he leaves a big vacuum when he dies.
Yes.
And that's a lot of the Wallace story.
Definitely. But once FDR is renominated, then there's some debate over who the vice presidential pick is going to be, and they want to go with a more moderate person. But Roosevelt basically threatens to not run if Wallace isn't nominated, and that's I think a shrewd enough move to help him get the nomination, even though not everybody at the convention is happy about Wallace.
This is the one where he gets jeered. People actually like him better at the other one.
Yeah.
One person says he's a mystic, which is kind of true because he's got that.
Yeah, he was in Manchuria doing God knows what.
Yeah, and there is somewhere that's going to come out during the campaign, and then he's not a mystic, he's a liberal philosopher.
Right. Yeah.
A Theophilosopher, whatever that word was.
Theosophist. Yeah, he's just open-minded is kind of where FDR went with that. I mean, I have to wonder, like, what, and that's the big question mark with a lot of stuff, is, like, what was in FDR's mind? What did he really want? Did he really want to move the country left? Because, again, at this point, World War II is, at least when World War II breaks out, they scale back a lot of the New Deal stuff. So at this point, does he know that's going to happen, and he's just, like, wants to put a kind of a liberal sheen on it? Or is he, like, trying to move as far left as he possibly can?
I think he definitely wants to pick his guy. I think the guy he wants at first is this guy Burns, but then Burns has a lot of trouble, a lot of big issues, and he comes to play in 44.
Right.
I know the big issue with him in 40 is he used to be a Catholic, so that like pisses off the Catholics. Mm-hmm. Though if you actually are a Catholic, that's also an issue.
Right. Yeah. So the speech, though, that Wallace gives accepting the nomination doesn't happen for another week after the convention. He gives it in Des Moines because there's so much consternation over getting him nominated. And
He's
then,
back in his home state.
Yeah, Iowa. And then he goes around the country stumping, and there's what looks to be a scandal about his letters that he's writing back and forth with Nicholas Roerich, who is the weirdo cult leader mystic guy.
Yeah.
And it looks like these are going to go public and be a big scandal. But Roosevelt is ready, and he has a scandal of his own procured about Wendell Willkie, who's having an affair. Which is interesting that he countered with that, because Roosevelt was also having affairs, like, up until really the 80s, you could kind of get away with that. So this would have been like the Monica Lewinsky scandal come early. I guess Roosevelt had enough clout to be like, this, we're going to start now making this an issue.
Yeah. But he's basically polyamorous, Roosevelt. Like he has he's got Eleanor, and then he's got his like secretary Missy LeHan, who's like kind of a second wife, and then sometimes he has other women around.
But what do you mean he's polyamorous?
Oh, sorry.
You just mean he's a womanizer?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. He's like he's a.
Were they like in a polycule, or is he just cheating? Cheating on his wife.
Sorry, I mean like he's like a polygamy guy, like a Mormon polygamist kind of guy. Sorry, I didn't mean. I would say
poly. I mean, I would say he was kind of poly, or at least open, because well, first of all,
so Eleanor, I guess that's what I was asking. Like, is he just cheating on his wife? More than he's just not cheating on his wife. He like philosophically believes that.
I think the women are allowed to sleep with other people. I think Eleanor sometimes who's doing that, and I think maybe one of the mistresses is married. Like Missy LeHand may have a husband, so I think it is actually. I think actually he was in a polycule. I didn't come in to say that, but you're right.
Right.
Yeah, he's in a
True progressive.
Yeah, we were run by a polycule. That's how left this country was during the New Deal.
Wow. I mean, I don't know if he believed that like everybody should do this, but he definitely thought he should be allowed to do it because he was an egomaniac. But Eleanor Roosevelt is his cousin, by the way. So they're inbreeding. They're creating kids who, I guess it's not a big wonder why you don't hear.
Said it on the record several times. I'll say it again. My grandparents are first cousins. It's fine for one generation. Just the next generation of cousins can't have a kid.
Really?
That's it.
Really?
Yeah, I looked up. I looked up some studies after I learned.
So they're like fifth cousins. Basically, if you're that elite, you know who your fifth cousins are. I could have easily sleep with my fifth cousin in New York. I have no idea who they are because we're not important.
I have no interest in doing that, but I will say also.
Well, yeah, you're in a loving relationship.
Yes, I am with someone who I'm 100% sure I'm not related to. And, but it
Same
has.
here.
Yeah. But I mean, I wonder at what impact it had, because Kermit Roosevelt is one of the Roosevelt sons, goes on to overthrow a democracy in Iran.
Yes.
I hate to be that's his grand. It's
that's his grandson.
It's Kermit
Sorry.
Jr. Yeah,
Kermit Jr. Okay, yeah. But it does have. I think I'm inbred. I can move my scalp and ears at the same time. So.
No, that's
amazing.
That's a special power.
You're an X-Men.
From inbreeding, I think.
I do like the idea of Roosevelt going up to Wallace and calling him a trad because he doesn't cheat on his wife.
Yeah, that probably they probably thought he was weird for that reason. Mm-hmm. Like on The Sopranos, there's that one character. Bobby doesn't cheat on Janice, and he gets teased. But
he's like, look, I did. I'm in a polycule, but also I married my cousin, so it balances it out.
But it is like an open secret around the elite circles that basically Eleanor and Franklin have no relationship romantically. Like they've had kids. And they are married, and they have a political relationship, but she found out he was cheating pretty early on and just kind of like accepted it, and they don't really get along. It's like awkward when they're in the same room.
They have a true Pakistani marriage. It's just strictly business, and also they're cousins. Yeah. That's pretty much what it is.
Now, they came first, though, but Pakistan starts a little bit after this.
Yeah, that's true.
So Pakistan copied them.
Yes.
Yeah, Wallace is now... he's running for vice president and is starting to kind of go harder than Roosevelt on Germany and Japan because they're not in the war yet, but it's we're getting close, and he speaks out against Nazi sort of ethnic hygiene policies and calls it a mumbo jumbo of dangerous nonsense.
It's like, this is people, not corn.
Yeah. Which
he's like, I mean, he's making a good point, but why does he always do the corn analogies all the time? I mean, I get it without the corn analogy.
If he had to do like debates, he would have brought up corn so much.
Yeah.
It would have hurt his cause.
But at the time, this is kind of a bold opinion because
people were racist as shit.
Yes, and even like liberals and progressives were pro-eugenics or had that sort of mentality. Even like W.B. Du Bois was like, we need a higher grade of black.
Teddy
Americans.
Roosevelt was into it.
Yeah, many people throughout America and the world were part of the eugenics movement, or at least believed in eugenics.
And the most. Sorry.
Go ahead.
The most famous guy in America is like still Charles Lindbergh, and he's like very into the Nazi cause.
Right.
And even like the secretary, the ambassador to England is Joe Kennedy, the Kennedy dad, and he's like, England's falling apart, and also like he kind of even is implying like it's okay what you're doing to the Jews, just keep it a lot quieter. Mm-hmm. At least the early stuff. This is a little bit pre death camps.
Yeah. But as Wallace says, by replacing Roosevelt with Wendell Willkie, that would make Hitler rejoice. So Hitler's starting to be an unpopular figure. And Willkie is, and this is, we'll cover him, I think, at some point, but...
absolutely.
It's interesting counterfactual. I don't think Roosevelt would be beaten, but Willkie is just running a Roosevelt light campaign. He's just like, I'm going to be less aggressive about the New Deal, and but I also am maybe even more of a globalist than Roosevelt. So if you had like an actual isolationist running against Roosevelt, like Charles Lindbergh, maybe the election at least would have been closer, or if not gone a different way.
Lindbergh could have put us in that man in the high castle situation.
Yeah, well, there's a whole other counterfactual series about that, which is The Plot Against America, based on a Philip Roth novel. I recommend, pretty good.
Yeah, you guys would be speaking German right now. Yeah, I wouldn't be here, but you guys would be speaking German.
So, of course, Roosevelt wins pretty big, and then Wallace becomes vice president. Is not popular among politicians. He's the head of the U.S. Senate, and takes the urinal out of the vice president office, because John Vance Garner had a urinal in there, as well as a bar in the vice president's office in the Capitol, and Wallace thinks this is unseemly, so he has them both removed.
Why the urinal?
Just to, do your business.
It was all
so you wouldn't
men.
have to use, I guess, the public bathroom that everyone else used.
And you could just keep drinking. You just probably like you take your beer to the urinal. Like basically, you're not leaving the room. We're just drinking all night.
Yeah.
Well, no, because he got rid of the bar, right?
Oh no, sorry. So in Nance, they have the urinal in the bar, and it's great. Everything's great. Nance Garner, they love it. Everyone in the Senate loves it. And Wallace comes in. He's a teetotaler. He's never drank. He gets rid of the bar.
Yeah.
And possibly because he got rid of the bar, no one in the Senate liked him, and that might be why he never became VP. And if he had kept that bar, maybe we never would have had the Cold War. So it's a very important bar and an extremely important urinal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. You're like, bro, fuck off, corn lover. All right, we're normal people here. We like to drink.
I mean, I think Garner said, and a lot of vice presidents have said this, that the vice presidency is not worth a warm bucket of piss.
Yeah.
So maybe that inspired the urinal.
It's basically just a party captain for the Senate, is what Garner thought it was.
Right.
And Wallace messes up that job pretty badly.
Yeah.
So is that it? I'm still trying to get it. Like, I guess a urinal is like connected with like debauchery drinking, because you're like not even sitting down, you're just standing up, you're drunk.
I think that maybe it was also the smell was not good, because I don't know when urinal cakes were invented, but there's a good chance they weren't around back then. Maybe the smell of cigars, but he didn't smoke.
That's true. I
think.
probably don't even know what a urinal back then looked like.
Yeah.
Anyways, so.
But I think it was also because like it's kind of an elitist thing to like I get my own urinal in my office, and Wallace was like, no, I will use the urinal of the people.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I could see Wallace having Pete sitting down. He has that energy.
He does.
Yeah. But he didn't love the presiding over the Senate. And again, this is his first elected office. So during roll call, he would just like slump behind his desk, and at first really does not like being vice president, but Roosevelt gives him a lot of power eventually. And he is able to do a lot with wartime economic jobs once that starts pretty early on, within a year of being reelected. War breaks out with Japan.
Yeah, it's a lot of he's a lot in the war supply business. And then FDR also kind of is like very ADHD. I kind of learned from this. Like he's just always kind of changing his mind and moving things around. But at different points, Wallace is in charge of a lot of the war production. And one thing Wallace does is he doesn't care if they overpay for stuff. He's like, well, that helps workers in other countries.
Wow.
And yeah, eventually business people go against him, and he loses some bureaucratic battles. And that might be the turning point when it's clear he's not on the rise anymore. And then he's likely to get replaced on the ticket.
Right. I mean, it's interesting. So Coolidge is, as we said, he was president, but before that, he was vice president. Harding dies in office in the 1920s. And Coolidge is one of the first vice presidents who actually has some responsibility. And then that's upped even, and Wallace also has a decent amount, but that's upped even more with Mondale, as we covered in the first episode. But now I'm thinking, like, has it gone back? Because I can't think of anything that Kamala's in charge of. There's like border stuff, but seems like she doesn't do much of anything.
Yeah, Biden seems a little like he has his advisors he likes, and he has the way he's going to do things, and it doesn't seem like Kamala is a big voice in the room.
Yeah. But he is at loggerheads with a lot of the other people in Roosevelt's administration, and that maybe is kind of by design. So that's kind of comes back to bite him maybe in 1944, but he beefs with the Commerce Secretary a lot, and is also, I think, involved in like preparedness for the war and the War Production Board, which is where things really come to a head with Jesse Jones, who's the Commerce Secretary, and they have like a pretty public beef. So Roosevelt kind of likes it when that stuff's happening behind the scenes, but I think he probably gets a little uncomfortable with Wallace publicly denouncing Jesse Jones, right?
Yeah, the people side is always the weak point for Wallace.
Yeah.
And having him, he can do these jobs, but having him be involved in political fighting and expecting him to like maintain any kind of decorum and not just speak his mind is not going to work out. And speaking his mind gets him in trouble a lot more later in his life as well.
Right. Yeah, because of their beefing, Roosevelt takes power from both of them and basically kicks them off the board, and then it gets turned into the Office of Economic Warfare, and this is kind of an embarrassment for Wallace, but he still has the people. The liberal base of the Democratic Party is increasingly becoming enamored with him because he does things like go to Latin America and speak Spanish, and kind of this is maybe American foreign policy at its best. You have a brief moment there with the quote-unquote good neighbor policy, where we're trying to have good relations with Latin America, and Roosevelt did bad things there too.
Oh, sure.
No denying that. But
I was going to say that, like, when you mentioned earlier that he advocated for one of his own policies by saying it helps workers in other countries, and now, like, this thing about him learning Spanish to go, this seems like extremely unique in American politics.
Yeah.
When Stalin found out he said workers in other countries, he's like, this guy will be my asset.
Yeah, right. Doesn't sound like an American thing to say workers of the world unite.
Right.
You know what I mean? Mainstream.
Yeah,
American.
yeah.
Can I say what he says in Latin America? He says, if the liberation of today results in the colonialism of tomorrow, the whole thing will be in vain.
Damn.
Yeah. And then eventually, the Time magazine is calling the 20th century the American century, and Wallace says, no, this isn't the American century. This is the century of the common man. This is the century which you're entering, will come into being after this war, can and must be the century of the common man, and perhaps it'll be America's opportunity to support the freedoms and duties by which the common man must live. Everywhere the common man must learn to build his own industries, his own hands in practical fashion. Everywhere the common man must learn to increase his productivity so that he and his children can eventually pay to the world community all they have received. No nation will have the God-given right to exploit other nations. Older nations will have the privilege to help younger nations get started on the path to industrialization, but there must be neither military nor economic imperialism.
Wow.
So this is,
Every common man shall have 12 bushels of corn each in my world of tomorrow.
He's really the only person in the world who think with any power ever thinks this. It's like Stalin's not going to go this nice. Like everyone's kind of power hungry except for him.
right. He's a utopian in a way, which is not an uncommon tendency at this point. But he is also vehemently anti-racist. And in 1943, there's a race riot in Detroit. 17 black people are killed by the cops, and Wallace goes there and denounces American fascists. He calls a lot of the segregationists midget Hitlers.
He's canceled.
Yeah. And he says, we cannot fight to crush Nazi brutality abroad and condone race riots at home. So he's going even further than his president in opposing American racism.
Race riot really back then was just, white people killing black people. Like the Tulsa race massacre, they destroyed Black Wall Street. That's called a race riot initially.
They should be called massacres.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically, the home equivalent of a colonial massacre.
And we talked about this a little bit, but he goes to Manchuria and Siberia when he's vice president, right?
Oh, yeah, this is a separate trip. Yeah, he is going to China on this one, but he's stopping in Siberia.
Wow.
He asked to go to Moscow, and FDR was like, where's the quote? FDR was saying, don't go to Moscow. You're giving your enemies the bullets to finish you off in the upcoming campaign.
Yeah.
So FDR just kind of warned him, but also there might be some leaning of FDR wanting to replace him, and FDR would send people abroad when he wanted to kind of get rid of them. Because when you went abroad, when you went on this long of a trip, you're gone for maybe up to 6 months. So he's gone in most of 44 and then comes back right before the convention.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Then just the places he's choosing to go.
Yeah.
Right.
So they say you can go to northern Siberia on the way to China. He sees gulags, but he's convinced that they're just nice farms with volunteers.
Right.
Maybe he is on the spectrum. I don't know.
He's not observant about people at all.
Right. I mean, they set up Potemkin villages where he goes, which is, they take away the barbed wire and the sniper nest, and they make it look like they just get people to put on nice clothes and act happy. And they've done that. They did do that to a lot of people, but they managed to do it to Henry Wallace.
The new book is very critical that he was there for a whole month and was still fooled.
It's like, wow, everyone here is so nice and thin and lean and
the
very
Russians,
health conscious.
The Russians say of him, Wallace was too democratic to get the job, meaning eventually become president. But for them, democratic just means open or accessible. And they just basically think they can definitely manipulate him.
Should be noted too. So this comes out in I don't know if this was known actually until this past year, but the kind of the more critical, more recent, actually really long bio of Wallace, The World That Wasn't. The author went into the Russian archives and discovers that when he's agriculture secretary, his employees are straight up just Russian spies. They're feeding information to the Soviets that may have been for political principles or opportunism or who knows. But
the Soviets kind of want to know how they want to know if they're getting cheated on Lend-Lease, and they want to understand how the capitalist machine works. Also, they can tell Wallace is the member of the cabinet most open to their beliefs.
Yeah. But
he's fucking going to hang out in Siberia and
shit.
So he really might have been a Russian asset.
Yeah.
Might. I don't mean
might. Yeah. It's we'll get to
does asset mean if you're a useful idiot and they're manipulating you but you haven't chosen it, can you be an asset without being chosen?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I don't know I guess so. If maybe you're conscious, maybe you're not.
There's Martha on the have you guys seen The Americans?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's Martha, there's the secretary on The Americans who's helping the Russians get information. And she doesn't know she's doing it. And then when she finds out, she's like, oh, crap, and she has to go move to Russia. So she might be an asset, but she didn't choose to be one.
Right. I guess I guess you can be.
There's no smoking gun of him saying, I'm going to betray America. I'm going to help Stalin.
Right.
There's no smoking gun against him like that.
And I don't think he ever thought of himself that way. But going into 1944, Roosevelt is running for a fourth term. There's a war going on. Seems like the sensible thing. But behind the scenes, he's getting his heart inspected, and the cardiologist says that he has about a year to live.
So, this was in 43.
Oh, okay.
And basically, he's got congenital heart failure, which is close to my heart because that killed my first dog. So, And I think now they can treat it in humans, but back then they couldn't. So, basically, the doctor's he knows he has a year to live. And Roosevelt doesn't ask, and he doesn't tell him. So no one, most, other than the doctor, and Roosevelt does follow the doctor's orders, but most people don't know this, except that people can look at him and tell, and they know he's not going to live the whole 4 years. And he does only end up living a month into the term.
Right.
Damn. He was falling off of bicycles and stuff.
Well, I don't think he was riding too many bicycles.
That was my stupid little Joe Biden joke.
Oh, yeah.
So Roosevelt doesn't have working legs.
Yeah.
That's the thing is they're okay.
Sorry, I just realized how stupid of a Biden joke that was. I wasn't really riding on bikes very much.
So like basically but he has to pretend like he can kind of walk because you're allowed to cheat on your wife, but you're not allowed to have legs that have been crippled by polio.
Yeah. I mean, so I've heard different, like, some historians say that it was pretty widely known. I mean, basically everybody knew he had dealt with polio, and a lot of people probably knew that he wasn't super mobile and used a wheelchair from time to time. But he definitely tried to present himself as like, see, I'm standing, but he had, the Forrest Gump metal braces.
He's still hanging out with all his non-primary partners.
Yeah.
Doing his thing.
Yeah.
Like no one expected him to be like Teddy Roosevelt and install a tennis court at the White House.
Right. And again, what's going on in his mind is another big question mark here, because he knows he's going to die. I have to wonder, maybe he thought he could cheat death and just keep living, and that it wouldn't matter who his vice president was because he'd just continue anyway. But there's also different views on where he thought the country and world were going. He's remembered by a lot of people as saving capitalism, and there's a quote where he says that was my greatest accomplishment. It's not clear if he meant from communism or fascism when he said that, but some people speculate he thought maybe after the war that America would move to a new type of economic system, because even though it was a wartime economy and they were scaling back on the New Deal a bit, they were spending more money, and this campaign is really about after the war, the four freedoms: freedom from want, freedom from hunger and homelessness. Those are things he wanted to make constitutional rights in 1944. So
there's the talk of the Economic Bill of Rights. Which some version gets passed, but like not anything significant, and like definitely not the guaranteed living wage. We do eventually get the GI Bill, which does a lot of that stuff for the returning veterans. Like my grandparents.
Yeah. But there's, some speculation that Wallace is going to maybe cost Roosevelt some states. And so, the party establishment definitely doesn't want him to be renominated. And Roosevelt it's funny how, like, even though he's winning by landslides, I mean, the way he wins these landslides is by being very politically shrewd and analyzing everything on a really granular level. There's, someone said you could if you drew like a line across America, he could tell you about each individual county and like the political dynamics therein. And in Minnesota in 1944, there's up to that point, there's been a farmer labor party, which I've written about, like a quasi-socialist, social democratic party that has been the main competitor to the Republicans. They had governors in the 30s. And Roosevelt in 1944 convinces them to merge with the Democratic Party to create what today is still known as the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party.
Oh, yeah.
And you look at this and it's like, why did he feel the need to do that? He's winning by a landslide. He's going to win Minnesota, but he was really obsessed with winning. So that makes me think he kind of maybe wanted Wallace out, but at the same time, he wanted to continue his legacy, wanted to be remembered, and he was increasingly skeptical of capitalism. So maybe he didn't actually want Wallace. It's really hard to say.
I think he ultimately, pushes for it. I also think he kind of maybe runs out a little bit of energy to really fight for Wallace. And they send the guy out, Flynn, like a campaign manager guy, to say that Wallace might cost him some states. And just like all the powers that be in the party just basically convince FDR, though he doesn't necessarily really pick Truman. Truman is just kind of like their guy that they like.
Yeah.
And he's affiliated with the head of the Democratic Party. He used to be like a party boss in Missouri, where Truman's from.
Right. Yeah, so going into the convention, he's getting sicker and sicker, and publicly he is kind of, there's a quote where he says, like, if I were a delegate to the convention, I would vote for Wallace. But that's not as ringing of an endorsement as he gave in 1940. But there's like Wallace is kind of being kept out of the loop. And he says, I've just arrived back from China where people are dying by the hundreds of thousands for the lack of food. So he's not interested in talking about, like,
Yeah,
polling.
they're trying to tell him, like, you're out as VP. And he's like, he's just like, people are dying in China.
Right. There's a thought that the fourth term is going to be even more progressive, really progressive. But FDR at this point is progressively
turning into a corpse.
Yeah. So if you can find somebody, Wallace says, who will get you more votes, by all means go for them. And FDR is like, how would your family feel about the catcalls of a rejection? Wallace says he doesn't care. But then the convention comes around, and Wallace maybe gets his Irish up. He gets a little more passionate about serving, and I think part of that is because he sees who's waiting in the wings. Who the establishment wants to swap him out for, and he turns around and takes it a little more seriously. 64% of the delegates, according to one source, support Wallace. Truman is at 2%. And at this point, Harry Truman's basically a nobody on the national stage. He's a senator from Missouri, also called the senator from Pendergrast, which is the political machine in Missouri, and he's a hack, right? He's doesn't actually care about the New Deal or really anything. He's just kind of worked his way up this establishment and happens to be there. So I think Wallace probably sees that and is like, okay, I guess I will stay in. And this is what it's called. There's a couple, like a lobbyist and a couple Democratic bigwigs form, quote, conspiracy of the pure in heart.
Yeah.
That's actually what they call themselves, and they're meeting behind the scenes to make sure Wallace is not on the ticket. Wow. They tell FDR they're going to do everything they can to stop Wallace from being renominated, and he's just kind of like, I'd rather you not, but whatever. Although maybe he fully agreed with them. It's kind of impossible to know.
He kind of makes a big move at the end,
right?
When he's talking to Truman, he kind of at some point he decides I'm gonna go for this replacement thing.
FDR does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get to it, but there's a moment when it's like, okay, this is I feel like that's what he really wants, and he wants Truman.
Yeah. Interesting. You pointed out. So Harry Truman, her wife's maiden name is Wallace.
Yeah, and she was more elite than him. So he has a crush on this girl, Bess Wallace, as a kid. He's scared to talk to her. And initially she's like, well, I'm Episcopal, and he's like Baptist, like he's too low status for me. But he wins her over by like starting businesses and going to World War I and leading people, and he's able to get his dream girl, this Wallace woman, to marry him, and he moves up to the Wallace status. And then the only thing standing in between him and being VP is this Wallace, so he defeats the Wallaces again.
Good. And then, so I didn't know this. Harry S. Truman, that's how I remember him, but the S was just S?
It's like, it's kind of stands for each of his grandfather's names,
Oh.
and they wanted to compromise. So his middle name, like him, is kind of a bland compromise.
Roasted. Yeah, I mean, there's a committee he's in charge of investigating the what becomes the military-industrial complex, and this is, when Americans are a lot more skeptical of foreign intervention, and ironically, he goes on to become president and really enshrine that same complex.
He's basically the last guy to successfully audit the Pentagon. I don't know if it was called the Pentagon at this point, but yeah, he's the last guy.
Yeah.
So he is getting a little bit of national buzz, but he's still a junior senator from Missouri, and not anyone's pick except for the bosses going in.
Right. But he loves Stonewall Jackson. Actually, also Andrew Jackson is in private like a racist and an anti-Semite, contrary to Wallace.
Maybe let's Jaffer. What do you think when you hear Harry Truman?
The bomb.
Yeah.
Yes, he's going to do the bomb. Yeah.
Right. But Truman's family is very excited about their son maybe being vice president. His mom listens to the whole thing on the radio, And she's like, they keep saying Roosevelt is going to die. Well, I'm 90 and they say that about me. I hope we prove them.
She's like, well, we'll both prove them wrong. And then FDR dies immediately. She makes it through most of the term.
Okay.
But yeah, they both do end up dying.
Yeah.
Truman, maybe y'all know about this. I heard somewhere that he was real important in our path with Israel and Palestine because he is sort of like a very religious Christian guy. And during that time, the U.S. was just stepping back away from it a little bit. But he was the one to be like full-throated supportive of Israel.
He makes the decision to do the partition. So with that, yeah.
Imagine.
America's always enabling Israel, and he basically gives the approval for the UN to create Israel. I read stuff in I read the McCullough book, it's pretty flattering, but the biography of him, and the Zionist lobby is really hounding him, and then when he does it, they say something like, after 2,000 years, you've reestablished the promised land or something like that. And his advisor's like, that was so corny. But Truman's crying.
He was like kind of a religious guy.
Yeah.
And Wallace is going to try to run to the right of him on Israel, actually.
Really?
When they run against him in 48, there's a little bit of yeah. Well, Wallace's base is New York and communists in New York, but also a lot of Jews.
Right.
Who might also be communists or whatever. But
at that time, yeah.
Yeah. So that's because that's all Wallace is going to get in 48 when he runs. Spoiler alert. For the second part.
So Truman, is not popular among the base, and at first doesn't really want to be vice president. He says 1600 Penn, that's a nice address, but I'd rather move in through the back door.
Rather not move in through the back. Yeah. He thinks the people who become president when the president dies are kind of losers.
Oh, okay, yeah.
TR and Coolidge had kind of disproved that, but he's thinking back to like the John Tyler, Andrew Johnson days when they were like terrible.
But another factor here is, the establishment really doesn't want Wallace, and Roosevelt desperately wants to keep the Democratic Party together during the war. So, and that goes for both sides. He yells. FDR, I think he yells this at Truman. He says, you tell that senator if he wants to break up the Democratic Party in the middle of the war, it's his damn responsibility. And at the same time, it's kind of a contradiction because FDR wants to control this thing, but he's also has to keep some distance. And he doesn't want to look like he's totally running the show. And Truman says, okay, well, if that's the situation, I'll have to say yes. That line of him yelling he wants to break up the Democratic Party, that kind of convinces Truman.
Yeah, then Truman realized it was like he's basically getting an order from his commander-in-chief. Yeah, because Truman didn't want to do it. They're like, he's the most stubborn mule from Missouri. He's like, I don't want to become president, like through the president dying, whatever. I guess he thinks he could win it later, but he's like old. He's like 60. This is his only shot. And he's a nerd from Missouri with glasses. But they're like, FDR was like, you need to do this, and he agrees.
Yeah. So Wallace does still make a really, really good speech, and FDR gives a speech too, and then there's delegates chanting, "We want Wallace, we want Wallace." There's this song about Iowa. It's like, Iowa, Iowa, land where all corn grows. And they're singing that. People from New York are singing a song about Iowa.
It's always back to corn with this guy.
Yeah.
He's probably, I would assume hearing that corn song, he was fully erect at this point.
Right. And while this is happening, Claude Pepper, a senator from Florida who is very, very progressive, even though he's from Florida, he has Wallace's name. He wants to put it in nomination. And if he does at that moment, everybody's cheering for Wallace. There's a pretty good chance he will get the nomination. And there's a union member from the railroad union at the gate. He lets Pepper in, and then he gets right up to the stage, and they adjourn the convention right before he can put his name in. So if he had been a little quicker, history would be very different. Yeah.
Because, yeah, this had happened at other conventions. Like 1896, we did William Jennings Bryan. He gets nominated this way. Actually, Wilkie had, like, if everyone at the convention gets excited enough, things can just happen. There's like a mob rule to it.
Right.
It's still, the conventions still matter until the 60s.
But
That's crazy.
they say it was a fire hazard thing, and they had to do it, but that's pretty
The
clearly.
bosses had put the fix in. They had told the guy running the gavel he had to adjourn it. But yeah, they do say, yeah, but it's the Democratic Party in Chicago. There's no rules. They could break any rule. They could put a voice in the sewer if they want.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Vanquished. If you want the full thing, because there is more, please go to patreon.com/The Vanquished, where you can get the rest of this episode as well as our full episode catalog. You can support our work as well as annoy us in the comments.